The fishing village remained hidden between towering mountains and the restless sea, as if the world itself had forgotten its existence. Its houses were built with sturdy wood and stones gathered from the slopes, withstanding the sharp winds that swept in from the ocean. The morning mist covered the village almost every day, slowly dissolving as the sun rose higher in the sky, revealing boats anchored in the small harbor, where the waters were cold and deep. There, time seemed to move at its own pace, unhurried to keep up with the rest of the world. The villagers, descendants of generations of fishermen, followed traditions passed down from father to son, holding on to their beliefs as if they were part of the land itself. They told stories of sea spirits that punished those who dared to break their rules, and of ancient sailors who never returned after challenging the treacherous currents. The streets were narrow, paved with uneven stones, and lined with lanterns that lit the way during stormy nights. The scent of salt and fresh fish filled the air, blending with the woody aroma of the workshops where boats were built and repaired by hands hardened by a life at sea. The few outsiders who arrived were met with wary gazes, for the village was not quick to welcome those who did not belong to its history. High on the hills surrounding the village, small isolated cabins served as homes for those who preferred to live apart from the community. Among them, one stood out for its solitary and silent presence. It belonged to Vincent, a man who had chosen solitude as a refuge, carrying in his gaze the weight of a past that few dared to question. Vincent bore on his body and soul the marks of a past that had never abandoned him. His face, sculpted by time and the salty sea wind, carried scars that went far beyond his skin. Every line in his expression, every shadow in his eyes reflected the burden of the years that had passed since the day everything changed. Once, he had been a skilled navigator, a master of the tides and the secrets of the ocean, until tragedy dragged him toward an unforeseen fate. He was not just a man who had lost a ship. He had lost a purpose, an identity. The sea had been his home, his compass, the infinite horizon that always promised freedom. Yet all of it had shattered in a single moment, when his vessel became a prisoner of the water's fury, and for the first time, he faced the undeniable truth of his own vulnerability. Death surrounded him that day, dragging into the depths those who had sailed beside him, and somehow, it chose to spare him. But what remained was not relief. It was a weight he had carried ever since, a silent debt he could never repay. The shipwreck that nearly took his life was still a constant ghost. The vessel he commanded had been swallowed by a furious storm, and he, thrown into the raging waters, clung to whatever he could until a favorable current carried him to safety. When he emerged from the depths of unconsciousness, he found himself in the fishing village, a place that sheltered him but never truly accepted him. Not that he wanted it to. From that moment on, he chose isolation, preferring the company of wood and tools over people. The details of that day remained fragmented in his memory. The sound of the wind howling like a starving predator, the thunderous tearing of sails under the relentless force of the storm, the bitter taste of salt burning his throat as he fought to stay afloat. And then, after the chaos, nothing. Only the gentle rocking of the waves and the silhouette of mountains rising on the horizon when he finally opened his eyes. What followed was not a new beginning, but a self-imposed exile. He accepted the shelter offered by the villagers, but never tried to belong. In his workshop, near the cliffs, Vincent spent his days repairing damaged boats and crafting new ones. The scent of sawdust and varnish filled the space, mingling with the salty air from the waves crashing against the rocks. His hands, marked by years of labor, shaped the wood with precision, as if he were sculpting not just boats, but fragments of a life he was trying, in some way, to mend. There, amid the rhythmic hammering and the creaking of wood being worked, he found a silent purpose, something that required neither words nor explanations. Each vessel he built was a tribute to the past he had lost, a ritual of redemption without witnesses. The boats that left his hands crossed the sea with the same freedom he once had, and in every hull he shaped, there was a fragment of an unspoken desire, the hope that, one day, he might set sail again. But the sea, though ever present, now seemed like an old acquaintance watching from a distance, patient and unreachable. The villagers respected him for his skill, but kept their distance. His past was a mystery to most, and his reserved nature discouraged questions. He rarely joined celebrations or gatherings in the central square. He preferred to watch the sea, still and contemplative, as if waiting for the waters to offer him answers he had never found on solid ground. He was not the kind of man who drew curiosity for what he said, because he barely spoke. Instead, he was remembered for what he did not do. He did not smile easily, did not engage in the fishermen's conversations, did not share stories of his youth or his days at sea. The only thing he offered the village was well-crafted boats and a silence he never broke, as if afraid that words might somehow pull him back to the very thing he was trying so hard to forget. The nights were long and lonely. His cabin, set apart from the rest of the village, was simple and functional, with nothing beyond what was necessary. A sturdy table, a shelf lined with old books on navigation, and an old locked chest, its contents unknown to anyone. There, only the sound of the waves and the wind rustling through the wooden planks filled the silence. Few knew that sometimes, when the village slept, Vincent would leave his workshop and walk to the shore, standing for hours as he gazed at the horizon, searching for something only he could see. There were nights when the wind carried indistinct murmurs, memories that came and went with the movement of the tides. The past never left him, and without realizing it, he remained bound to what he had lost, like a castaway who had never truly found solid ground. Vincent had learned to live with solitude, but deep down, he knew that something still tied him to the past. Maybe it was the weight of guilt for having survived when so many others hadn't been as lucky. Or perhaps it was the feeling that the sea, in some way, had not yet finished its story with him. The ocean was a cruel lover, one that had given him everything and then taken it all back without mercy. No matter how much he tried to stay away, the truth was that he had never stopped belonging to the water. It was in his skin, in his blood, in every thought that drifted without direction. Time had not freed him, only made him a man accustomed to his own prison. Something inside him still waited, perhaps for a call, a sign, a reason to believe that the story was not yet over. The sea cast her onto the shore like a secret carried by the waves. Elise arrived in the village wrapped in mystery, her fragile body carried by Vincent, who had found her adrift, injured, and unconscious. The rescue happened at dawn, when the sky painted the ocean in golden hues and the mist still clung to the cliffs. Vincent didn't know how long she had battled the water, but her condition made it clear that the journey had been cruel. Her skin was cold to the touch, her hair clung to her pale face, and small marks on her body indicated she had been through something beyond the simple fury of the sea. There was an urgency about her, as if her presence there was not just a whim of the tide but the result of a desperate escape. When she woke, she remembered almost nothing. Her eyes, filled with confusion, wandered around the room without recognizing the rustic wooden ceiling, the lit fireplace, or the salty scent hanging in the air. Her fragmented memory showed only scattered images, the rocking of a boat in the darkness, hands gripping her arms, distant voices, the crash of a storm. But there were no faces, no names, no certainties, only the persistent feeling that something dangerous was following her, even if she couldn't say what. Her own name surfaced in her mind like a distant echo, one of the few remnants of her identity that had not been erased. The first days were marked by fever and weakness. The salt water had ravaged her skin, and her sore muscles hinted that she had fought bravely against the currents. Vincent, accustomed to repairing wood and torn sails, now faced a different challenge, caring for someone who didn't even know who she was. The village, naturally distrustful, did not welcome the presence of a stranger brought in by the waves. The villagers murmured among themselves, fearing that her arrival would bring trouble. Some believed the sea never gave anything, without demanding something in return. Others saw her as an omen, an outsider, disrupting the order of their isolated world. Elise, in turn, felt the weight of their stares, even without fully understanding why. She noticed the whispers when she passed by, the fleeting glances that quickly turned away, the restrained gestures that revealed suspicion. But it wasn't just the villagers' hostility that unsettled her. The real fear came from within, the absence of answers to questions her own mind refused to form. Her body reacted before her consciousness could process the danger. She flinched at certain sounds, instinctively recoiled when footsteps came too close, and felt her heart race at the sight of boats on the horizon. All of it pointed to a past that still existed somewhere inside her, but that remained locked away, like a chest whose secret was just beyond her reach. In the quiet moments, when the village slept, and only the wind moved through the stone alleys. Elise tried to piece together the puzzle of her own existence. Some images would suddenly surface, the glow of stars reflecting on dark water, the rough texture of parchment beneath her fingers, the tight pressure of ropes around her wrists. But what did they mean? Who had she been before she arrived there? And more importantly, what had led her to be lost at sea? The emptiness in her mind was as vast as the ocean that had nearly swallowed her, and the only certainty she had was that she was not there by chance. Something had brought her to this place. Something, or someone. The village was a place shaped by time and tradition, where every face was known, every story intertwined with another, and new arrivals were rarely welcome. Elise's sudden appearance, brought in by the sea under uncertain circumstances, stirred more unease than compassion. The villagers saw in her something that disturbed the established order, an unknown element that challenged the fragile balance of their secluded community. Fear of the unknown manifested in whispers and wary glances, in doors closing a little earlier, and in hurried footsteps whenever she passed by. There was something instinctive in their rejection. To them, the sea never returned anything without a purpose, and if the ocean had brought her there, it was because something had followed her, whether a burden, a debt, or a danger still unseen. The village's resistance was not just superstition, but a natural defense of those who lived at the mercy of unpredictable forces. For generations, they had learned that every wrong decision could come at a high cost. Winter always took its toll. The sea claimed lives without warning, and trusting someone without knowing their story was a risk few were willing to take. Elise, fragile and quiet, was an enigma. Her lost gaze and the uncertainty of her own identity did not inspire trust. The lack of answers only deepened their suspicion, and little by little, she became avoided, like a shadow that did not belong in that landscape. Among them all, only Vincent refused to be swayed by fear or distrust. His own past had taught him that not everything had an easy explanation, and that a face marked by suffering did not always carry guilt. He saw something in Elise that he recognized, the look of someone adrift, trying to find something solid in the midst of the unknown. Even knowing that his decision might bring him trouble, he chose to help her, offering shelter and care without expecting anything in return. His choice did not go unnoticed. The villagers saw his actions as a challenge to the natural order of things, and many wondered why someone so reclusive would take on such a responsibility. The village's distrust soon turned toward Vincent. The once merely curious glances became evaluative, as if searching for hidden intentions. Some believed his actions were naive, while others whispered that perhaps there was something more between him and the stranger the sea had delivered. Isolated from the village for so long, he was no longer part of their daily lives. His solitude made him a distant figure, someone whose motives were not understood by those who lived within the boundaries of established rules and customs. The days passed in an atmosphere heavy with tension. The village continued to watch Elise from a distance, and Vincent, aware of the eyes upon him, remained steadfast in his decision. He would help her, regardless of what people thought or said. For someone who had already lost so much, ignoring judgment was a small price to pay. As he worked in the workshop, or walked along the coast, he noticed the hidden glances, the hushed whispers that ceased the moment he approached. But none of that mattered. Vincent was not a man driven by the approval of others, and at that moment, Elise needed him more than anyone could understand. Time passed, and Elise's strength slowly began to return. The days of rest gave way to the need to move, to occupy her hands and mind, while trying to piece together the fragments of her memory. Her body, once weak and marked by the struggle to survive the sea, now responded better to movement, and the constant pain that had accompanied her since her arrival became a distant memory. Though her mind remained shrouded in shadows, something within her adjusted to the new routine, as if she were finding an anchor in the midst of the unknown. It was then that she began accompanying Vincent in his work, offering help whenever possible, despite having no experience in the craft he had mastered. The workshop, once a solitary space, started to take on a new rhythm. The scent of freshly cut wood mixed with the rhythmic sound of tools against logs, and Elise watched everything intently, absorbing every detail. Vincent didn't bother explaining. He worked in silence, focused, and she learned by observing, imitating his movements, trying to understand the logic behind each cut, joint, and polish. At first, Her inexperienced hands faltered, the wood giving way under the wrong pressure. But over time, her movements became more precise, her actions more confident. Every piece she worked on was a small victory, proof that even without memory, her mind was still capable of learning, adapting, and evolving. Boat building required patience and dedication. Elise soon realized it was not just manual labor, but a knowledge that demanded respect for the wood, an understanding of the tides, and an almost instinctive grasp of how each piece should behave against the forces of nature. Vincent worked without haste, as if each vessel he crafted was an extension of himself. There was an almost meditative rhythm to the way his hands glided over the planks, feeling the texture, assessing the resistance, anticipating the final shape before even beginning assembly. Elise, without even realizing it, started following that rhythm, feeling a strange familiarity with it, as if, somehow, the act of creating something with her own hands brought her a lost connection. The hours in the workshop became her refuge. The work occupied her mind, pushed away the weight of unanswered questions, and for brief moments made her forget the emptiness inside her. Each boat built, each repair made on old vessels, each adjusted piece was a step away from the unknown that tormented her. The wood, with its distinctive scent and solid resistance, was something real, something that did not fade or vanish like her memories. It was a fragment of reality she could cling to. Vincent never commented on her progress or encouraged her directly, but she noticed the way he glanced at her sideways, assessing her dedication, recognizing the silent effort she made to master the craft. He never questioned her reasons for wanting to learn, nor did he set any barriers. He simply let her find her own way in that world, allowing the learning process to become part of her personal reconstruction. And without them realizing it, something began to form between them. Not just a bond of coexistence, but a deep connection, built on shared silences, on gestures that spoke louder than words, and on a mutual understanding that needed no explanations. As the days went by, Vincent started noticing subtle details that didn't align with Elise's condition. Even without memory, her actions showed an instinctive familiarity with elements that required prior knowledge. At first, they were small things: an attentive glance at the sky before a sudden weather change, a quick reaction to sensing the wind's direction, an automatic adjustment of the knots on the ropes used in the workshop. Over time, these details became impossible to ignore. One morning, while working on the repair of an old fishing boat, Elise ran her fingers over a worn nautical map Vincent had left on the table. He observed her for a moment, not expecting her to show any recognition. However, her eyes moved over the lines and markings with too much ease. Before she even realized what she was doing, she corrected a detail about the local sea currents, pointing out a subtle shift that was not noted on the paper. Vincent said nothing, but the feeling of strangeness grew within him. Someone without memory should not possess this level of knowledge, let alone express it with such precision. It was not an isolated case. On another occasion, when clouds began to gather on the horizon, the village fishermen remained unconcerned. The sky was still tinged with blue, and the sea remained calm. However, Elise, sensing the weight of the air and the intensifying humidity, stopped working, fixing her gaze on the horizon. Before Vincent could ask what was bothering her, she put away the tools and moved the materials to a more sheltered place. Hours later, a storm struck the village without warning, catching even the most experienced sailors off guard. She had made no predictions, voiced no certainty. She had simply known. These episodes, though discreet, began to stir an unease within Vincent. He never questioned Elise directly, but he watched. The way her hands touched the nautical instruments, how her eyes scanned the sea with an analytical precision, how her body reacted before even the environmental signs became evident. It was as if a deep knowledge buried beneath the veil of her amnesia still persisted within her, manifesting in the most unexpected moments. The village, always wary, began to notice these peculiarities. The fishermen, who had spent years learning to interpret nature's signs, watched closely as Elise seemed to understand the sea effortlessly. Their expressions carried a mix of curiosity and fear. For a people who lived at the mercy of the waters, anyone who knew more than they should about its whims was regarded with caution. Vincent knew it wouldn't be long before questions arose. But what troubled him the most wasn't the village's suspicion. It was the question he himself could no longer ignore. Who was Elise, really? The The coexistence between Vincent and Elise, initially marked by distrust and silence, gradually transformed into something deeper, harder to ignore. Without realizing it, their days took on a new rhythm, a new cadence that went beyond the work in the workshop or the silent walks by the sea. There was a growing familiarity in their gestures, an unspoken understanding that emerged in the way they shared tasks, in how their eyes met at the most unexpected moments. But behind this closeness, there was something both avoided admitting, a silent tension, a latent fear lingering between them. Vincent, accustomed to solitude, felt restless in Elise's constant presence. He had lost before. He knew the bitter taste of watching someone leave, never to return. The pain of the past had made him build walls around himself, keeping any form of attachment at a safe distance. But now, beyond his control, those walls seemed to be slowly crumbling. Her presence wasn't just an interference in his routine. It stirred parts of him he thought had been dormant forever. The fear of attachment grew each day, and Vincent knew that if he allowed it, Elise could become someone impossible to lose without it destroying him all over again. On the other hand, Elise carried her own fears. Although Vincent was the only person who had truly cared for her since she had been rescued, a deep unease grew inside her. She felt indebted to him for everything he had done, but at the same time, the fear of putting his life in danger weighed heavily on her shoulders. Something from her past still lurked, something that could reach her at any moment. And if, by staying there, she was dragging Vincent into a fate he didn't deserve, if the shadows that pursued her ever found their way to that peaceful village, he would be the first to pay the price for taking her in. This dilemma followed them, silent, as their lives intertwined more with each passing day. During their work in the workshop, Elise had already learned Vincent's patterns, knew when he was lost in thought, or when his expression grew distant. Vincent, in turn, noticed the moments when Elise drifted into daydreams, as if trying to grasp something in her mind that refused to surface. Neither spoke about it, but both felt the weight of this growing connection while trying to keep it under control. The village, always observant, noticed their closeness, but also sensed that something remained restrained. Vincent still maintained his reserved demeanor, as if fighting against something he refused to admit. Elise, on the other hand, avoided allowing herself any permanence in this newfound bond. But it was undeniable. They were caught in an invisible thread, a connection that pulled them together and pushed them apart at the same time, creating a delicate balance that could break at any moment. The quiet routine of the village was disrupted when a stranger appeared among the simple houses and dirt roads. His arrival did not go unnoticed. Men and women paused their tasks to watch him cautiously. Strangers rarely showed up there, especially not someone with such a distinct presence. The clothes he wore, made of reinforced fabric for long journeys, were worn by time, but still held the elegance of someone accustomed to navigating different societies. His gaze, sharp and meticulous, swept the surroundings with the precision of a man who knew exactly what he was looking for. Elise, who was at that moment helping Vincent organize a newly arrived batch of wood in the workshop, felt an inexplicable shiver run down her spine. As soon as her eyes landed on the traveler, a deep unease settled in her chest, as if a distant memory was about to emerge from the shadows. Her fingers tightened involuntarily around the edge of one of the planks, and the air around her seemed to grow heavier. There was something about that man, a subtle detail that triggered a sense of imminent danger. Vincent noticed her reaction. It was unusual for Elise to halt her movements like that. Her face, usually composed even in moments of uncertainty, now revealed a hidden tension, a fear she was trying to mask. The traveler, meanwhile, continued moving through the village, asking questions to a group of fishermen gathered near the harbor. Their expressions ranged from curiosity to distrust, but their responses were always vague, as if no one wanted to get too involved with the newcomer. The distance between the traveler and Elise shrank as he approached the central square, where boats were being prepared for the next journeys at sea. Her heartbeat quickened, an echo of something she couldn't fully remember. Instinct told her that this man was not there by chance. He was searching for someone who had been lost, someone who, until recently, hadn't even known her own name. Murmurs spread among the villagers, creating an atmosphere of uncertainty that hung over the town like a thick mist. The traveler's presence was a silent warning, a sign that Elise's peaceful days were numbered. And deep down, she knew. Her steps up until now had only been an interlude between who she had been and who she was inevitably bound to become once again. The time Elise spent in the village had given her not only glimpses into her own existence, but also into those around her. At first, her focus had been solely on recovering fragments of her own memories, but gradually, something about Vincent began to pique her curiosity. His silent, almost distant presence made him a figure shrouded in mystery. However, what she didn't know was that behind his calm and reserved facade, there was a deeply buried secret, something he had chosen to hide from everyone, including her. It was on a quiet afternoon, while they were both in the workshop, that the first piece of this truth was revealed. Elise was adjusting a piece of wood, her hands moving with precision, when, by accident, an old map fell from a nearby shelf. She picked it up, examining it with curiosity. It was an aged map, marked with navigation routes that Vincent, given his profession, would certainly be familiar with. But what intrigued her the most was the signature in the corner, a signature she immediately recognized as belonging to a ship captain, not a mere fisherman. As he examined her, something in Vincent's gaze revealed that he had realized her discovery. The tension in the room was palpable, the silence filling the spaces between them. Elise had unintentionally stumbled upon a piece of his past that Vincent was still trying to bury. He stepped closer to the table where the map lay, and with a slow movement, took it away from Elise's sight. The surprise and fear were evident in his eyes, but in his voice, there was no more room for mystery or disguise. "I am not who you think I am anymore," he said, his words carrying a weight Elise had never imagined. She looked at him, unsure how to react, as he began to tell her the story she had yet to hear, a story that had been lost at sea, along with the shipwreck that had brought him there. Vincent had not only survived the tragedy that changed his life, but after losing his entire crew and the ship he once commanded, he made a choice that led him to abandon everything he had ever been. It wasn't just the sea that had separated him from his past. It was his conscious decision to sever all ties with that world. He was no longer the man who captained a vessel, who navigated trade routes, braved storms, and knew the secrets of the ocean. That life, his friends, his crewmates, had all become distant memories, something he never wished to revisit. Vincent's secret was not just about what he had lost, but about what he had chosen to leave behind. He no longer wanted to be that man. Unlike many who, after a tragedy, seek to reconnect with their past, Vincent had chosen to move forward, even if it meant letting go of everything he had once called his own. It wasn't just about surviving the shipwreck. It was an irreversible decision to keep going, to leave the sea and everything it represented behind. Now, Elise understood why he kept his distance, why he refused to be involved with the world he once knew. For Vincent, the shipwreck had not just been about losing people or possessions. It had been the loss of his identity, a choice to completely start over. In a way, she also understood the pain he carried, an invisible but ever-present pain that prevented him from fully connecting with anything or anyone. He was, in a way, sailing an endless ocean of solitude. Over time, the fragments of memory Elise had been holding on to began to intensify, as if something inside her was trying to rebuild itself. At first, the small glimpses of her past life were confusing, like puzzle pieces that refused to fit together. She knew there was something important about herself, something that connected her to the vast world beyond the village, but everything felt distant, intangible. Each time a new piece of memory surfaced, the feeling that something was about to be revealed grew stronger. The moment of clarity finally arrived with the appearance of a stranger in the village, a man who, unlike all the other inhabitants of the small community, seemed to know exactly who she was. He was not just a lost traveler. He had a reason, a mission. The moment Elise's eyes met his, a wave of unease washed over her. It was as if a chill ran down her spine, and a familiar sensation surrounded her. The man seemed familiar, but why? Soon, it became clear. He was someone from Elise's past, a past she had desperately tried to forget, but one that had now found her once again. The traveler, through his words, lifted the veil that had shrouded her mind, revealing a story she didn't fully remember, but that haunted her with its magnitude and danger. Elise had been a renowned cartographer, a specialist in maps and maritime routes. She had worked for a guild of explorers that had access to some of the world's most secret and valuable maps. Her job involved documenting new routes, discovering remote islands, and even gathering information on uncharted waters. However, her role in the guild was not that of a mere observer or contributor. She had access to highly classified information that could forever change the course of maritime trade. The maps she drew and the notes she made were more than just records. They had the potential to redirect global trade, open new markets, and alter the economies of entire empires. The last expedition Elise led had been the riskiest of her career. She and her team had been searching for a legendary island, a place only spoken of in old sailors' tales, a crucial point for future trade routes. But unlike other expeditions, this one had ended in disaster. Elise had found herself entangled in intrigue within the guild, as a rival group sought to seize the discoveries she was on the verge of making. It was during this mission that her life had taken an unexpected turn, leading to the shipwreck that had nearly cost her everything and had stolen her memory of what had truly happened. The man who had arrived in the village was more than just an observer. He had not only recognized Elise, but he also knew how crucial her knowledge of the secret maps could be. He brought alarming news. There were dangerous people looking for her, desperate to force her to reveal the secrets she held. Secrets that could not only change the course of trade, but also bring immense power to those who controlled such knowledge. Elise was immediately shaken. She had known that her past was far from simple, but she had never imagined it was so complex and perilous. With every word the traveler spoke, more fragments of her past resurfaced. Her eyes, her hands, the maps, and the countless nights spent studying routes and sketching new lands. All of it began to fall into place in her mind, but not without consequence. The weight of the responsibility she had once carried, along with the enemies she knew she had made, now felt closer than ever. The revelation of her true identity not only unearthed what she had tried so hard to bury, but also brought with it a sense of urgency. The traveler, who now seemed more like a messenger from a forgotten past, warned her that the threat against her was real, and that the people she had left behind were still searching for her, willing to do whatever it took to reclaim the maps and the knowledge she possessed. With each passing day, the sense of danger intensified. The traveler wasn't there by chance, and his words had ignited a spark of warning in Elise. She tried to convince herself that her life in the village could continue uninterrupted, but the weight of the past seemed to lurk around every corner. Her memory, once so fragmented and hazy, was now painfully beginning to reassemble. The knowledge she possessed, which she herself had not fully understood until that moment, was what put her most at risk. She knew people were after her, but the magnitude of the threat now felt more real and imminent than she had ever imagined. Dangerous men willing to do anything to access the secrets she held, were hunting her. She had never imagined that her ability to create maps could be so coveted. Her records, made over the course of many expeditions, contained strategic information that could shift the balance of trade routes and, consequently, influence the power of entire nations. The guild she had belonged to was not just an organization of explorers. They were tied to powerful merchants and politicians whose interests leaned more toward control and manipulation than toward the legitimate exploration of lands and seas. These men who hunted her were known for their cruelty. The traveler, who had been sent to find her, was not just a messenger. He was, in fact, at the forefront of a network of mercenaries and bounty hunters who had been hired to ensure that Elise was found, preferably alive, but without her knowledge. The threat was clear, endangering not only her freedom, but her very survival. When the extent of what she knew was revealed, it became clear that her future was now in the hands of ruthless people willing to take any measure to reclaim the maps and secrets she had guarded. Vincent, upon realizing the gravity of the situation, felt an even heavier burden fall upon his shoulders. He knew that by protecting Elise, he was putting his own life at risk, along with the tranquility of the village he cherished so much. But something inside him told him that she could not be left at the mercy of those men. There was a fragility in Elise, something that made her vulnerable, but also a quiet strength she herself had not yet fully discovered. He couldn't just stand by and watch as the village, and she herself, were about to be swept into a storm he had not wanted, but was now inevitable. The tension between them grew each day. Although Vincent tried to remain calm and act pragmatically, there were moments when he saw the fear in Elise's eyes. She, who once seemed so distant and at peace with her new world, now found herself surrounded by shadows of the past, threatening to consume everything she had built. The fact that she carried something so valuable in her mind, something so coveted, made any attempt at a normal life impossible. She knew she was no longer safe, and the eyes of her pursuers were already upon her. Vincent struggled to find a way to help her without further exposing himself to danger, but the constant presence of the mercenaries lurking nearby left little room for careful action. He wasn't sure what else he could do to prevent Elise's past from catching up to her in such a destructive way. The idea of fighting against these relentless forces seemed like a lost battle from the start, yet he couldn't imagine letting her go alone. The village, which once regarded them with indifference, was now beginning to sense that the threat was closer than they had imagined. The tension in the air thickened. Rumors about the outsiders searching for Elise spread, and the once peaceful village found itself entangled in a conflict even the most experienced fishermen could not have foreseen. Vincent's refuge, which had once seemed safe, was now turning into an imminent prison, with enemies lurking in the sea, vast and untamable, seeming to hide more than just waves and winds. The days were growing heavier, and the silence, once comforting, now carried the feeling of a storm about to break upon them. The weight of Vincent's decision hung over him, growing denser each day. Elise's future, and even his own, now depended on a choice that became increasingly difficult. He knew that the only way to keep her safe was to let her go. That dark world she had once belonged to would continue to pursue her, and he knew that nothing would stop them from seeking her past, from demanding possession of the maps she had created. His instinct, as a protector and a man of few ties, told him to sever the connection and let her go. After all, the secret she carried made her presence dangerous for both of them, and he no longer wanted to be dragged into a storm that had not originated from his choices. His safety and the peace of the village were at stake, and perhaps the only way to preserve them was to allow Elise to walk away. But there was a part of him that couldn't resign itself to that. Vincent looked at Elise and saw more than a woman on the run. She was someone with a quiet strength, someone who had been shaped by life's adversities, but who still carried something pure inside her. The bond that had formed between them was undeniable, a connection that could not be severed without leaving deep scars. She, who had never had a true home, had found in his presence something close to a peace she hadn't known existed. For Vincent, she had become more than just a survivor of a shipwreck, more than a woman with a mysterious past. She was a person, a presence that he hadn't realized he could still have in his life. The emptiness he had carried since the tragedy at sea was beginning to be filled by her presence, and that, in some way, made him more human, more vulnerable than he had ever wanted to be. For Elise, the choice was even more complex. She had lived a life of uncertainties, and the memories of her past, now beginning to take shape, did not bring clear answers. What she did know was that, by Vincent's side, she felt something she had never experienced before. He was not like the men who had controlled her life in the past, and with him, she had found something resembling comfort, security, and even hope. She knew that if she stayed in the village, she would remain entangled in a dangerous secret that could consume everyone around her. But the thought of leaving him, of walking away from Vincent, brought her a sense of loss she couldn't fully understand. He was the only fixed point she had in a turbulent sea of fragmented memories and lost certainties. The decision Vincent had to make was not just about Elise's safety. It was about his own redemption, his chance to move beyond the past that haunted him. If he let her go, he would be alone once more, burying the few ties he had built, but preserving his life and his peace. On the other hand, if he chose to keep her by his side, he might have to face forces beyond his control, but he knew that his choice would define his own fate. The possibility of living alongside someone, of building something real and lasting, pulled at him in a way he had never thought possible again. Yet that desire for connection came at a high price. Elise, in turn, wasn't sure if she was ready to make that sacrifice. She felt the intensity of the situation, the weight of being the cause of so many problems, but also the strength of a bond growing stronger with Vincent. He was the safe harbor she had never had, the first person to look at her without judgment, without seeking something she could not give. She found herself torn between the desire to protect him and the village, and the urge to cling to the only chance she had at finding something true and lasting. The idea of going on alone, without him, seemed impossible, yet she knew that her presence could put everything he had built at risk. Thus, the choice lingered in the air, uncertain and inevitable. Both were aware that their future would be decided in the coming hours, through the difficult decisions they would have to make. Love, friendship, loyalty, and fear were all intertwined in a single moment. and nothing could guarantee that either of them would emerge unscathed from the internal storm consuming them. The big question now was, how far were they willing to go to protect what they had found in each other, and how much could love truly withstand the weight of their pasts and the world still closing in around them? The silence of the village, which had always been deep and heavy, became even denser when the dangerous men finally arrived. The threat that had loomed over the small fishing refuge since Elise's arrival had now become a concrete reality. They had followed her trail, moving through the shadows like hunters stalking prey. They knew the value of the maps she carried, and what they were willing to do to recover them was something none of the villagers even wanted to imagine. Vincent watched their approach with growing tension, knowing that the safety of everyone depended on his actions, but also on decisions that were now beyond his control. He could no longer hide Elise, nor could he protect everyone without exposing himself to the imminent danger. But Elise, who until that moment had always seemed reluctant to confront the ghosts of her past head-on, made an unexpected decision. When the men reached the central square, threatening and intimidating the villagers, Elise did not hesitate. She knew that if she didn't face the situation now, everyone there, including Vincent, would pay the price. She had become someone she no longer recognized, someone who no longer feared her own identity or what it represented. Elise's face, once marked by uncertainty and fragility, now displayed fierce determination. She knew she could no longer live in the shadow of her own fears. The life she had rebuilt alongside Vincent, with the tranquility he had offered her, could not be destroyed by those who sought her. In an almost instinctive impulse, she stepped forward toward the intruders. Her eyes, once clouded and lost, were now clear, focused. She knew her choice was final, but she was ready to face the consequences. The men, seeing her approach, exchanged wary glances. They hadn't expected someone so seemingly fragile, with such an obscure past, to be capable of standing her ground. But Elise, with courage born of necessity, stopped before them. She knew that the only way to protect Vincent, the village, and everything she had begun to build was to confront them, not as a fugitive, but as someone now taking control of her own destiny. Her body trembled, but when she spoke, her voice was firm and resolute. The reactions of those around her were mixed. The villagers, accustomed to keeping their distance and avoiding involvement, watched with a kind of surprise and even admiration. Elise had astonished everyone, including Vincent, who looked at her with a mix of disbelief and respect. He had always known her as a woman who carried silent pain, someone who seemed afraid even of her own reflection. But now, at that moment, she had become something entirely different. Someone willing to risk everything to save others. Someone who had found courage deep within her soul. Elise, with her heart racing and her mind focused, faced the men. She knew they would no longer see her as a helpless victim. She was no longer the cartographer haunted by her past, but a woman determined to fight and to protect everything she had begun to love. Her sacrifice was not just physical, but emotional. By confronting them, she was giving herself completely to the strongest part of her, the need to protect the new home that, despite being temporary, she had finally found. She no longer saw herself as someone to be hunted, but as a defender of her own fate. The men then realized the game had changed. No longer just in pursuit of a simple prisoner or informant, they were now facing a woman who did not fear the risks, who knew what she had to lose, and who was willing to fight to the end. Elise no longer hesitated. Her sacrifice was a cry of defiance, not only against those who pursued her, but against the very fate she refused to accept. And, despite the imminent danger, there was something profoundly transformative about her stance, something that inspired not just Vincent, but also everyone who watched her. Elise's act not only saved Vincent, but also transformed the atmosphere of the village. The residents, touched by her bravery, began to unite in an unexpected way. Elise's presence, once met with suspicion, had now become a catalyst for a collective resistance. Although she knew there were no guarantees of victory, she also knew that by making this choice, she had already won the most important battle. The battle to take ownership of her own destiny, without the shadows of the past. After Elise's sacrifice, Vincent found himself at a crossroads. For the first time in many years, he no longer felt the need to hide or withdraw. Seeing the woman he had helped, now displaying courage in a way he had never imagined possible, ignited a fire within him. Something inside Vincent had broken, and instead of his previous resistance, he felt that it was time to face the world again, rather than remain locked away in his own pain. He, who had always refused to return to the past and to the suffering the world had brought him, now saw an opportunity for redemption. Watching Elise stand against danger, showing a strength he himself had never expected, something shifted in Vincent's heart. He could no longer hide behind his own fears or uncertainties. Fighting alongside her meant more than just protecting a woman he was, in some way, beginning to love. It was a fight for his own chance at reconciliation with the world, for reclaiming a part of the life he had left behind. Vincent, who had spent years in silence, scarred by the shipwreck and the pain of loss, now stood tall. He realized that his journey with Elise was not just about defending the village or seeking a safe future. It was also about facing the ghosts that had haunted him for so long. He knew that if he continued to retreat, he would never be whole again. The time to act was now, and he was no longer willing to let the past dictate his actions. With his workshop transformed into an improvised center of resistance, Vincent began gathering the villagers, including Elise, to devise a plan to confront the men who threatened them. His mind, hungry for strategies and solutions, began crafting a way forward as if, somehow, he had finally found the strength he had been missing. He knew he couldn't fight alone, and the weight of his decision was enormous. By joining Elise, he was not only putting his own life at risk, but also embracing the commitment to be part of something greater. For the first time, he was willing to let others trust him, and in turn, he trusted her. The bond between them, which had once seemed like a tense alliance filled with mysteries, had now become a solid force, where their skills and motivations complemented each other. Elise, with her knowledge of the outside world and her surprising abilities, now had by her side a man who, for the first time in years, was ready to fight alongside her, not just watch her fight alone. Vincent knew he could not guarantee the success of their battle. The world outside was ruthless and cruel, and he was fully aware of the risks. But what mattered now was the fact that he was willing to face it, to fight with Elise, to defend his village, and to fight for his own redemption. He was ready to confront the ghosts of his past and look toward the future, by her side, even if that future was uncertain and filled with challenges. The upcoming battle was not just against the enemies threatening the safety of their home, but also against the fears and insecurities Vincent had carried for so long. Elise's renewed courage and sacrifice had been the key to finally breaking the invisible chains that had kept him bound to the past. He, who had spent so much time running, was now ready to face the world again, with Elise by his side, and with the hope that, in doing so, he might find a new way to live. By choosing to face the world outside, Vincent was not only fulfilling the role of protector, but finally allowing himself the chance to start over. He knew this decision would change everything, but what mattered was that he was no longer alone, and no longer needed to hide. The battle ahead was much more than just a fight for his life, or the village's survival. It was a chance for him to rediscover himself, and perhaps begin rebuilding the life he had lost after the shipwreck. Vincent and Elise, aware of the imminent dangers, needed to act quickly and wisely. The pressure on them increased daily, and time was not an ally. The men hunting Elise were getting closer, and the constant threat of being discovered loomed over them. In this scenario, the only way out was to deceive the enemies and forge a new identity for Elise, one that would keep her out of the reach of those who sought to capture her. For this, Vincent used his skills as a builder and his knowledge of the world around them, creating a network of forgeries and disguises that could mislead anyone searching for Elise. The plan involved subtly but effectively altering her appearance and crafting a convincing backstory about her origins and goals. He knew every detail could be crucial, so every aspect of this new identity had to be meticulously crafted. Elise, with her sharp intelligence, also played a fundamental role, piecing together fragments of the memories she still had, trying to retrieve information that could strengthen her new persona. She was instructed to adopt a more reserved demeanor and maintain the facade of a woman escaping a dark past, someone who wouldn't attract suspicion, but could still evoke the empathy of those who crossed her path. The transformation was gradual and careful. They wore simple clothing suited to their surroundings, but with subtle touches that Vincent knew could make a difference. The workshop, once a place of refuge and shelter, became the center of the operation. There, hidden among tools and wood, Elise's identity began to take shape. As she adjusted to her new role, Vincent worked in the shadows, mapping out escape routes and safe havens in case the plan failed. Throughout this process, their trust in each other deepened. Vincent realized that Elise was stronger than he had imagined, and Elise, in turn, began to understand the silent sacrifice Vincent was making, devoting himself entirely to protecting her. She started to see that he was not just a man running from the past, but someone who, despite his scars, still fought for something beyond himself. Together, they formed a team capable of overcoming obstacles that once seemed insurmountable. To complete the disguise, they needed to involve the village without revealing the true purpose behind this transformation. Vincent, knowing the people around him, managed to enlist a few trusted villagers, instructing them to accept Elise's new identity without asking too many questions. They helped her assume the role of an ordinary woman with a simple story, like anyone else struggling through difficult times. This would increase the chances of success because, in the enemy's minds, a woman with no clear past could easily be dismissed as an insignificant threat. The change in the village did not go unnoticed, but contrary to Vincent's fears, the villagers seemed more willing to welcome Elise than to reject her. The simple life she embraced and the skills she began to demonstrate in the workshop were well received, and she soon earned the trust of some, even though no one knew her true identity. Rumors about her arrival and fabricated history spread, providing her with a degree of protection, since the dangerous men searching for her no longer knew exactly where to look. While Elise's new identity began to take hold, Vincent and she couldn't afford to relax. They knew the deception had an expiration date, and that at any moment they could be exposed. But for now, the plan was working. The village was no longer just a temporary shelter. It had become a sanctuary, a place where Elise could hide, where she and Vincent could, at least for a while, find a false sense of peace. However, they knew the danger still loomed over them. The enemy's tracks were getting closer, and Elise's secret, though well guarded for now, remained a burden they both carried. The solution lay in continuing to deceive their pursuers, staying vigilant, and most importantly, waiting for the right moment to take the next step in their journey. A step that could finally bring them freedom, or, if it failed, lead them to an unforeseen fate. Over time, the village, once filled with suspicion and fear, began to see Vincent and Elise in a different light. The initial apprehension toward what they didn't understand gradually gave way to silent but growing acceptance. Elise's transformation, and the way she integrated into the rhythm of the community, with her work in the workshop and her ability to adapt to a simple, respectful life, allowed her to be seen not as a stranger, but as just another person like everyone else. Vincent, meanwhile, maintained his reserved nature, but his loyalty to the village was never questioned. He had become an almost mythical figure, someone who knew what it meant to survive, not just against the relentless force of the sea, but also against the ghosts of his past. Vincent's skill in boat building, his quiet dedication to his craft, and the way he cared for his workshop earned him the respect of everyone. Slowly, the village began to consider them a natural part of its daily life. Elise, although she knew her true identity was still a well-guarded secret, felt that her bond with the people around her was growing stronger. She had once carried the weight of a past filled with mysteries and dangers, but now she felt the lightness of daily tasks and the peace of a place where no one looked at her with suspicion. She had never imagined she could find a sense of belonging in such a simple place, but there, amidst the salty wind and the waves crashing against the rocks, she felt something she had never experienced before, a sense of home. Despite this newfound balance, they both knew that at some point, the past might come back to claim its due. The threat looming over Elise never fully disappeared, but at that moment, something stronger kept them together. They had something they had never found anywhere else, a space to be themselves, far from the brutality of the world they had left behind. Vincent and Elise, after reflecting on everything they had been through, and what they might still face, made the decision not to continue living a life of constant escape. They knew they might never fully belong anywhere, as their lives had been shaped by pain and hardship, but in that small piece of land where the sea and wind met, they found something that, at least for a brief moment, made them feel truly at home. They decided to stay. Without hesitation, they chose to build a future together. Vincent, who had once shut himself off from the world, now found himself looking toward the horizon with a new sense of hope. Elise, though still haunted by the shadows of her past, found a reason to believe in something greater than running, a commitment to facing the future without being alone. Together, They began to shape a new life. Vincent, with his expertise, started teaching Elise how to build boats with the same passion he had always dedicated to his craft. Elise, in turn, offered him new ideas, new ways of thinking about things he had long taken for granted. They worked side by side, not just as partners, but as two souls coming together to create something lasting, something that could withstand time and storms, something that represented more than survival. It represented the choice to truly live. The village, which had once watched them with suspicion, was now becoming a home where they could finally put down roots. The new beginning they were building was not just about boats or hard work, but about mutual trust, about the ability to create something together that they had never known before, true peace. Even though Elise's past and the shadows that followed her could never be completely erased, the future before them was now a space where they could build something more solid, more real, a new identity where they were more than just fugitives. They were, at last, people with a story to write, with the right to live without fear of ghosts catching up to them. The love that had grown silently between them, nurtured by trust and shared experiences, now proved stronger than any external threat. Together, they could finally look toward the horizon and see a future that, though uncertain, was theirs to shape, without the weight of a past that had once defined them.